Iran Supreme Leader Ayatollah Mushtaba Khamenei has defiantly rejected a warning from President Donald Trump that the U.S. naval blockade could be enforced for months. On Thursday, Khamenei issued a statement on the conflict, saying a new chapter for the Gulf and Strait of Hormuz is taking shape, adding that Tehran will secure the Gulf region and eliminate the enemy's abuses of the waterway. He goes on to say that Iran shares a common fate with its Gulf neighbors and, quote, foreigners who commit evil have no place but in the depths of water. The commander of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Aerospace Force, Majid Mosavi, has warned the U.S. against any potential military action. It follows U.S. media reports that President Trump had been briefed by the military on options for a series of short and intense strikes aimed at breaking the stalemate. Well, earlier, President Trump called on Tehran to accept a deal and, in his words, give up. The Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, has been telling a Senate Armed Services Committee hearing that the world is safer because of U.S. action in Iran. These are live pictures from the hearing.
Over the last several years, with these worries about munitions running short. Is that right, Mr. Secretary?
That's exactly right. The president has charged up with not just replacing anything, but filling it up, as he might say, to tippy top, and make sure that the remainder of this term and future presidents have all the munitions they need for any level of contingencies, especially considering the dangerous world we live in.
I want to turn now to Operation Epic Fury. It's been a smashing military success. Unfortunately, we have suffered casualties to include soldiers killed in the line of action. Obviously, our military takes the greatest steps possible to protect our troops, whether they are in action or whether they are on bases in the region. No war, though, is antiseptic. Mr. Secretary, could you explain some of the steps we've taken to try to minimize to the greatest extent we can the number of casualties we've taken in the Middle East?
First of all, every day we live to ensure that we follow through on the legacy of those who gave everything. So that's front and center for us. But I can also say, and the chairman may want to weigh in, from the beginning of looking at the possibility of this contingency, setting the defense and ensuring that Admiral Cooper and everyone throughout CENTCOM had every possible measure they could to ensure that our troops are protected and force protection was maximized was the top priority. Moving assets to the region, we integrated our air defenses with local Gulf countries to ensure our shot doctrine was maximized, whether it's ballistic missiles or on drones, flowing in the most recent capabilities to ensure we can intercept drones, moving troops off the X. I think what people mostly don't know is that a massive effort was undertaken before this conflict to move as many humans off of targets to other places and maintain operational security about where they might be to minimize the space with which Iran could hit. We always knew something getting through was a tragic possibility. But I can assure you from our perspective, that was priority number one, as it was Admiral Cooper's, to ensure that fortification and missile defenses were right there when we went on offense if we had to.
General Kane, do you have anything to add?
Well, in addition to just, again, mourning our...
And you're watching Al Jazeera. We are bringing you coverage of the House Armed Services Committee that U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is appearing before, alongside Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff General Dan Kane. Pete Hegseth there was responding to a question from Tom Cotton, who's a Republican member of the committee. Tom Cotton saying that the war had been a great success so far. This is the war in Iran he's talking about, but had taken U.S. casualties. Pete Hegseth there explaining the efforts to protect U.S. troops in efforts like this. I'm wondering if Patty Culhane from Born This, she's on Capitol Hill for us. Slightly different tone, Patty, compared to what we heard yesterday, which was much more combative. We heard very strong statements from Pete Hegseth, firing back particularly at Democrat members who've been criticizing him for not explaining well enough why the U.S. had been carrying out this military action.
Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth very much still offering fire rebuke to Democrats, but that was Senator Tom Cotton, as you mentioned. He's a Republican. And so, again, this is the second day of hearings, and what we've seen is the Republicans largely are supportive of the president, of the Secretary of Defense, of the war in Iran, and Democrats are questioning the why, the how, when does this end? Interesting, we heard from the chairman first, Senator Roger Wicker. He's actually gone on record in the last couple of days saying that Donald Trump, U.S. President Donald Trump, needs to stop talking to Iran, even though we're not quite clear where the negotiations stand, and that he should start launching the military campaign again. Then we heard from the Democratic leader of this committee, Senator Jack Reed. He had some very pointed questions for Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, and he made a little bit of news. He said, according to unclassified numbers, Iran still has 40% of its drone capacity and 60% of its ballistic missile capacity as it had before the war. Now, Secretary Hegseth said we can't get into that. That's classified information. We'll talk about that in a classified setting. But then he went on to say that the U.S. believes it has decimated Iran's military industrial base so that they won't be able to make large-scale production of either those missiles or those drones. But that would be a very telling statistic if that is in fact borne out, because we have heard from the beginning from this Trump administration, although they've had various why they've launched the war, they've said their goals have been to destroy Iran's missile program, destroy its armed forces, and if that is in fact true, then it's going to be hard for the U.S. to claim victory if so much of the Iranian stockpile is still intact.
Patty, thanks very much indeed. I should just point out, I made a slight mistake. I called this the House Armed Services Committee. That was, of course, 24 hours ago. This is the Senate Armed Services Committee. Two different things, two different sets of questions, but very similar lines. Patty, I appreciate it. Patty Culhane there at Capitol Hill. The UN Secretary General has warned that the crisis in the Strait of Hormuz could lead to a major global recession that's going to force tens of millions into poverty.
The longer this vital artery is choked, the harder it will be to reverse the damage, and the higher the cost to humanity. Developing countries will be hit the hardest, as crushing debt impedes their ability to cope, with lost jobs, deeper poverty, and more hunger. The crisis has already locked in losses for months to come, and every day that ships cannot move escalates these costs and amplifies their reverberations across the global economy. And so my message to all parties is clear. Navigational rights and freedoms must be restored immediately, in line with the Security Council Resolution 2817. Open the strait, let all ships pass, let the global economy breathe again.
Al Jazeera's chief U.S. correspondent Alan Fisher is at the White House for us. So is the growing economic pressure that's been caused by the blockade of the Strait having an impact on the Trump administration?
Well, look, the Trump administration have been out and around the media in the last few hours, touting very good job numbers, doing much better than they expected with the number of jobs created. They're talking about the GDP, the size of the growth of the economy. Again, those figures are better than expected. This is all macroeconomics, though. Most people still think that their bills are higher, and that is reflected in the polls. They say that Donald Trump hasn't quite got a grasp on the cost of living, and people are finding that their bills are going up, and they attribute that to the war in Iran. Now, Kevin Hassler is Donald Trump's chief economic advisor. He's been here at the White House on the driveway, and I grabbed him for a quick couple of words along with a couple of other journalists in the last few hours. This is what he had to say.
Kevin, thanks. I mean, you're out in the media today. Tim Scott's been on the media. Steve Scalise is on the media saying that everything's going to get better very quickly. Is this a push from the administration to convince the American people that the economy is not as bad as they're feeling in their pocket?
Well, let's look at the assertion that we're pushing to distract from a bad economy. We had a strong GDP report today that was actually unusually strong because it was a massive amount of capital spending, because people are building factories, creating jobs, putting machines in, and we have 54,000 people that are employed building factories, that were deployed building factories when President Trump took office. If we had the GDP number would have been a lot higher, except imports went up, but the imports were the highest quality imports you've ever seen. They're all capital goods, almost half, instead of, like, you know, Chinese stuffed toys. And so right now we've got that. We've got that initial claims for unemployment insurance, which is like a metric of our people losing their jobs, are the lowest we've seen since the 60s. Federal government employment is the lowest we've seen, which helps reduce budget pressures, the lowest we've seen since World War II. Personal income is skyrocketing, and so the economic numbers are strong, and the GDP number reflects it as well.
So what do you say to people that don't follow macroeconomics?
People look at their wallets and they vote, and there's a massive economic literature that says that that's how you predict elections. Is Ray Fair, Yale, you could look it up. And what matters is how are people doing when they look at their own circumstances. And right now, the lowest number of people since the 60s are losing their jobs. Incomes are growing at a rate that was never seen during the Biden administration. When people look at their own circumstances, Ray Fair's evidence shows that that's what impacts elections.
Kevin Hassert, Donald Trump's chief economic advisor, talking to me on the driveway here at the White House just in the last couple of hours. It's clear that the Trump administration is keen to get the economic message out. They believe that this is just a short-term pain for a long-term gain, and they think they're already seeing signs that the economy is beginning to come back after the 6-week shock of the Iranian war. The problem they've got is that most people don't feel that way, and as I say, the polls reflect that, blaming Donald Trump for the problems that they're having meeting their bills at the moment.
Al Jazeera's chief US correspondent Alan Fisher at the White House. Thank you very much indeed. We're going to bring in our guests here in Doha. We've got Mark Emmett. He's a retired US general, a former assistant secretary of state for political and military affairs. And in Tehran, we've got Ali Akbar Dariani, a researcher at the Center for Strategic Studies. It's an Iranian political think tank. Gentlemen, thank you both very much indeed for being with me. Ali Dariani, I want to come to you first because I want to talk to you about this statement that we heard from the Ayatollah just in the last couple of hours. He says that there is a new chapter for what he calls the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz taking shape. What do you think he means by that?
The 40-day war changed everything. A new Iran has been born. Ayatollah Khamenei's message means that a new security order is in place, and Iran is going to administer the Strait of Hormuz and make sure that it will not be attacked again. That's why the issue is beyond reopening the Strait of Hormuz, but establishing the fact that as of now, ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz have to go through the Lara corridor and the route Iran has determined to make sure that this new security order will be in place for all ships in the future. That's a very clear message. And also reminding the United States that you cannot attack me and walk away. Iran is going to break this blockade in the days to come, and it's wrong to assume that you can exchange reopening of the Strait of Hormuz based on the new rules, based on the new procedure, with lifting the blockade. That's the message.
General Kimmett, so the understanding from Ali Akbar Dariani there is that as far as Iran is concerned, the entirety of the Strait of Hormuz is Iranian water. But if I understand it correctly, essentially the strait was open, it was open water, and the routes that for shipping didn't go anywhere near what Iran would regard as its sovereign territory. Where does that leave the US in terms of trying to maintain some sort of open passage for shipping in the event that we get to the point where some sort of discussion is reached?
Well, I don't think we'll reach that level of discussion. I think as long as the Iranians continue to have this view that is unsupported by any country in the world, any international organization in the world, the United States will maintain the blockade. I think the blockade and international condemnation will keep the strait closed. And so I think it's up to this point, it is up to the Iranians themselves to declare that the Strait of Hormuz is like no other international passageway in the world, which is free and open access.
Ali Akbar Dariani, I want to ask you about this definition that Iran is using in terms of control and monitoring of the strait, because the suggestion seems to be that it regards the ships going through the strait as some sort of threat to Iran, and therefore they have to be guided through it. Can you just explain to me what Iran's process is and why it feels the need to offer protection from what critics of Iran would say would be Iranian threats?
Does international law allow the United States to